Hello, good afternoon. My name's Sally Andreu. I'm the OxLEP Skills Hub Manager, and welcome to the Skills, Employment and Enterprise of Oxfordshire's Ethnic Minority Communities briefing. Next slide, please, Alick. Thank you. So the format of the lunchtime session, we're going to have a presentation for about 45 to 50 minutes. And then a 10 or 15-minute Q&A. We're expecting about 40 odd people, so microphones and webcams have been turned off. If you'd like to ask a question during the session, please use the chat box and we'll aim to answer all questions at the end. The session will be recorded and we'll share the recordings and PowerPoint slides afterwards. It's going to be uploaded onto YouTube in a little bit once you've got to some checking to be done regarding some of the data sharing. So hopefully you'll find the session informative. So next slide, please, Alick. So really a bit of an introduction, why this report, where we're using the data, a little bit of a background. So we commissioned this report through last year. We got funding through the Skills Advisory Panel, or otherwise known as the Oxfordshire Skills Board, by the Department of Education to create a local skills plan and report. The report was created using about 70 data sets which were prescribed by the Department of Education for what the landscape looked like for Oxfordshire with skills. However, what we realised actually when writing the first report last year is that we didn't have any information about the ethnic minority communities in Oxfordshire. So utilising some more funding from the Department of Education, we commissioned this report, which has been incorporated in the refreshed version, this 2022 version of the Local Skills Report and Plan, which is the link is on the page here. And actually it's been utilised particularly in chapters 3, 4 and 5, which is on the OxLEP's website, and there's a link. The final copy of the report will be completed at the end of next month, and we'll be creating a more concise executive version this summer because the report is about 67 pages long. And actually we want to be able to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to utilise it. Finally, I'd really like to thank the Oxfordshire County Council's data analytics team, in particular Margaret and Alick, who are driving the slides this afternoon, and also to our peer review participants from the University of Oxford, Oxford Brookes, and also Oxfordshire's High Sheriff, Manawar Hussain, for supporting us on this project. So I'm going to hand over to Margaret and Alick to drive the slides forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sally, and we're delighted really to have supported OxLEP Skills with this piece of work. So what I'm going to do is start off by talking through the process that we went through to put the report together, and oh, we're back with, yeah, here we go. So we've divided the session into 3 main parts. I'm going to talk through the first section and then hand over to Alick, who will talk through other data to do with graduate outcomes, the labour market and so on. And then Alick will show you an interactive dashboard which looks at data from the census survey. So before, just how we developed the report was we talked initially to OxLEP in probably about May time last year, and discussed the kind of data and evidence that we could put together that would shine a bit of a light on the experience of people by ethnic minority group in terms of employment and skills, starting really with education and the population. My name's Margaret Melling. I work as a senior research officer for Oxfordshire County Council, and Alick works as an insight analyst, and we were joined by colleagues from other from our team, so Bella Image, John Carubel, and we had a steering group which met regularly, about monthly, to talk through the data and evidence as we gathered it. And the really helpful part towards the end of the process was to have these peer review meetings that Sally's referenced. The writing about ethnicity, ONS or on the gov.uk website, you can find information about that, and that was the policy that we adopted throughout the report. So we used ethnic minority as a term in preference to kind of other terms that are used, non-white British or BAME, for example. When we talk about ethnic minorities as an entire group, that includes white minorities. There are broader so there's different ways of categorising ethnic minority groups, and where possible we've used the most detailed groupings rather than the broad groupings, but you'll see that as we go through the data. Okay, so
sorry Margaret, I'm just gonna try and unshare and then reshare, because I think this is going out of presentation mode and then coming back in presentation mode, which is a bit distracting. So if you bear with me 1 second, I will just do that again. Okay, so I think I'm back in presentation mode, and I'm going to go to the next slide.
Fab, thank you. Okay, so just very quickly, that flicked out again. On the right hand side of this slide, you've got the list of sources that we made use of in pulling together the report. We had quite a lot of information in here from the Census 2011 survey, which is obviously old. We are expecting release from ONS with the 2021 census from, I think it says the latest is early summer, so middle of this year. We'll start to see data which was collated in March 2021 and will give us a very good up-to-date picture of our ethnic minority population. There's other data that we've made use of, in particular a special request from Higher Education Statistics Agency for student data and graduate outcomes data for Oxfordshire and others. Just to note that because Oxfordshire's ethnic and minority population is small, we haven't always been able to look in detail at the different experience of cohorts of people. And where that's been the case, sometimes we've used national level data. Okay, so first thing to say overall, so as of 2011, as of the last census, we had about 107,000 people, 107,000 people of an ethnic minority background. So that's about 16% of the total population. And there's the little donut chart on the right hand side of the slide shows how that breaks down by major ethnic minority group, or rather minor ethnic minority groups. The largest category in 2011 was this other white group, which includes residents of quite a wide range of different backgrounds. So you will have people in there who identify as having an ethnic background from parts of Europe, France, Germany, other countries within Europe, and Eastern European countries, including Poland and Romania, as well as people who are here from North America, for example. So that's quite a broad, diverse grouping in itself. And the population of ethnic minority residents in Oxfordshire has grown from 10% in 2001 to 16% in 2011, and it varies across the county. So Oxford City has the highest proportion of people with an ethnic minority background, 36% of the total population in 2011, and West Oxfordshire has the lowest with 7.4%, and that compares to 20% for England as a whole. Okay. What we know has happened since 2011 is there's been an increase in diversity of the population, and this data is from England and it's working age population. And just to note that this is showing you people who have an ethnicity other than white, so it's not actually including that large kind of white other group. This is people who are other than white, and what proportions of the population, the working age population of England, and how that's changed. So in 2012, 14.4% has grown to 16.6% in 2019. And locally, we're not able to look at that same data set because the sample size for that survey isn't large enough. But we can look at how the population of pupils who attend state schools in Oxfordshire and the ethnic background of those pupils has changed. And what this chart is showing you is the change in the count between 2011 and 2021 of state school pupils who are resident in Oxfordshire and all years, so right from reception up to the final year of secondary school. And the chart is a change chart, so it shows you that the group that has increased the greatest is this white other group, followed by mixed white and Asian mixed other groups. So that means that, in 2011, there were 18% of school pupils, state school pupils in Oxfordshire from an ethnic minority background, and by 2021 that had increased to 27%. Another thing that's important to recognise when you're looking at data on ethnic minority background is that there's a very big difference in the age profile by ethnic minority groups. So these charts are age profile charts, and they show you the proportion of people by age group for the main ethnic groups within Oxfordshire in 2011. So the chart on the left shows you for the white group a population that's arranged so from 0 to 4s up to age 85 and over, spread, and it has the oldest age profile of any of these different groups. So the next one is Asian and Asian British, showing quite a large bulge in a kind of working age population. Mixed multiple ethnic group had the youngest age profile. We can also map where ethnic minority residents live in Oxfordshire, and the map on the left here shows you out of term time ethnic minority population as a proportion of the population. And that shows that we have the concentrations of people with diverse backgrounds living in Oxford City and also living in Banbury. So those are two main areas of the county. Alick will be able to show you in a bit more detail when he looks at the interactive dashboard how different groups vary in terms of location. But just to say that Oxford City and Banbury have two quite different populations. Oxford City has much greater diversity of ethnic minority population living in the city, a higher proportion of residents than Banbury. So Banbury's population has two large groups. There are other groups in Banbury as well, but the two large groups are other white and Pakistani population, whereas Oxford City has a large other white population, but other groups living within the city. And we can map that data from the census against the information that we get from the indices of multiple deprivation. And that shows that broadly ethnic minority groups are more likely than the total population to be living in the more deprived areas in Oxfordshire. So what this chart is showing you is taking those areas of Oxfordshire which are ranked within the top 10% and the top 20% nationally as most deprived. So those areas of Oxfordshire, of which 4% of our total population are based in those areas. So 4% of Oxfordshire's population are within the most deprived 10% to 20% of areas nationally. But if you look at any of the ethnic minority groups, then you are more likely to be living in deprived areas, and you are most likely from a Black background. So Black Caribbean, 18% of Black Caribbean population lives in those most deprived areas of Oxfordshire. Black African, 16%, other Black group, 15%. Okay, so that's a bit about our population. So in terms of education, what we can look at for this, this chart is showing you two things. One is the proportion of Year 11 pupils who are eligible for free school meals, and this was in 2020, and that's the axis, the horizontal axis, and then the vertical axis is showing you average attainment 8 score at Key Stage 4, so that's GCSE for state-funded school pupils. And so the top left of the chart shows you where there is higher attainment and lower free school meals. So the Chinese group has, in this particular cohort, no pupils within that cohort eligible for free school meals, and the highest level of attainment of these broad ethnic categories for that particular year. The average overall was free school meal proportion 9% of Year 11 pupils, GCSE 50.2, average 8 attainment score for GCSE. So the white group just slightly lower in terms of free school meals, similar in terms of GCSE as the average. And then other groups, Asian, mixed and black, all have higher proportions of pupils eligible for free school meals and lower, well, Asian similar to the white group, mixed and black, lower GCSE attainment. In picking out English and maths, so English and maths attainment is important. Having a pass in English and maths is a prerequisite for apprenticeship or A-levels. So just picking out the proportion of pupils who achieve grade 4 or above in English and maths GCSE. So this chart showing how that varies for state-funded school pupils in Oxfordshire for 2020 versus the England average. So on average, 72% of pupils in Oxfordshire achieved a pass in English and maths at GCSE, and above average were the Indian, Chinese, white, Irish, any other Asian, white and Asian groups. And that's, so the Oxfordshire average was similar to the white British group, and the groups with the lower attainment were Traveller or Irish heritage, Gypsy, Caribbean, white and British Caribbean, Pakistani and so on. Just to notice that there are small cohorts when we're talking about this, so some of those groups are very small and it's a single year, so things will vary year on year. So some national data here. This is looking at choice of apprenticeship topic around apprenticeship achievements in England for 2018-19, split by 3 main apprenticeship topics: business, admin and law, health, public services and care, and engineering and manufacturing, and then all the other topics kind of grouped into this other group. So the top bar is showing you how that breaks down in terms of apprenticeship achievements for the white British group. So the most diverse set of subject choices for the white British group, and then we have sorted it by the business, admin and law category. Asian groups much more likely to achieve apprenticeships in business and in health, and Black African much more likely to achieve a health apprenticeship. And this is something that we'll come back to in terms of topic choices later on in the presentation. So one of the things that we can look at from the higher education statistics data is choice of higher education subject. And there's a couple of things on this particular slide. What this is showing you is for the main group, so we're back looking at broad groupings now, Asian, Black, mixed and white, what the top 5 subjects were that were chosen by different groups. And you can see some differences. So for mixed and white groups, more likely, well, will have in their top 5 creative arts and design topics. The Asian group has got computing as one top 5, which doesn't appear in top 5 of the other groups. And there are some differences between the proportion of students who are choosing topics between Oxfordshire and England. So the columns show you Oxfordshire proportion versus England. So for example, for the Black group, 32% of Black students have chosen a subject allied to medicine. That includes things like nursing, pharmacology, health science type subjects, compared with 21% across England. Asians similarly higher proportion Oxfordshire than England in terms of choice of higher education subject. Okay. The other thing that we can look at is information on family background of undergraduate students. This is looking at Oxfordshire's students who are living in Oxfordshire for the year 2018-19 and how that varies according to family background, family occupation. So it's sorted by higher managerial and professional occupations, which is kind of like the pale yellow colour, and the routine occupations kind of dark green. So you can see that students with a Chinese background are the most likely to have a family background with high managerial and professional occupations, and the Bangladeshi students are most likely to be coming from backgrounds with routine and semi-routine occupations. And similar, this is the same set of data. We've got two charts here, one showing whether students have parents with higher education qualifications. So top of the top, with the most, the highest proportion is the Chinese group, and with the lowest proportion is the Bangladeshi group. And then type of school attended, state funded or privately funded in dark green. Again, most likely to have attended a privately funded school is the Chinese group, and least likely is the Bangladeshi group. And I think this is where I'm handing over to you, Alick.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for the dancing slides at the beginning, everyone. That was me, but it looks as if the PowerPoint's now stable. So we've covered the background of undergraduate students in Oxfordshire. In this next section, we're going to look at those students who didn't complete their studies or dropped out of university, as well as those students that did complete their studies. What sort of occupations did they go into? What salaries did they go on to earn? So starting with this slide, so this is showing the national picture, and it's showing non-continuation rates by broad ethnic group. And what the data is suggesting is that there's a much lower proportion of white students who don't continue with their studies compared to the other broad ethnic groups. And the Black ethnic group has the largest proportion of students who don't go on to continue their studies. That proportion was around 15 to 16% in 2017-18. Unfortunately, that is the most recent data that we have available. It'd be really interesting to know how that might have changed since then. It's worth noting that that proportion of students dropping out of university has been increasing, or was increasing, between 2013 and 2018. It's maybe worth briefly noting at this point that throughout the report, we've looked at descriptions of differences between ethnic minority groups and trends, but we haven't really looked into detail into why there might be those differences or trends, mainly because the answer to that's going to be very complex and beyond the scope of the data that we have available. But hopefully in looking at some of these differences, we can have a first step towards answering those questions of why. So moving on to graduate students who then complete their studies. So this picture here shows degree classification by broad ethnic group. And again, this is the national picture because we don't have sufficient data just for Oxfordshire. And what you can see is generally that white students are more likely to achieve first-class honours. Black students are the least likely to achieve first-class honours degrees. And in reverse, white students are the least likely to achieve third-class honours or pass degrees and lower seconds, and black students are the most likely to achieve those types of degrees. Now, we thought potentially some of the explanation for these differences might be due to different proportions of students taking science subjects, because we know from higher education statistics data that science subjects tend to have a higher rate of first-class honours degrees. But in looking at that data, that doesn't seem to account for these differences. It does seem as if there's something else which might be driving this pattern. Okay, so here we're looking at 15 months after graduation, whether students are in full-time study or employment. So the bar chart that you can see, the blue rectangles represent the England data, and the orange rectangles represent the data for Oxfordshire. And what you can see at the England level is that students from the white group are more likely to be in full-time study or employment 15 months after completing their studies compared to the Asian, Black and mixed groups. When you look at the data for Oxfordshire, that pattern is broadly the same with one exception, and that's for the Black group, which seem more likely than they are nationally to be in full-time employment or study. Now, the issue with this is data which comes from the Graduate Outcomes Survey, so it's not a comprehensive coverage of every graduate from Oxfordshire. It's survey-based data, and the numbers behind this data are not very large when you start splitting by ethnic group for Oxfordshire graduates. So when we looked at this difference for the Black group, it's not statistically significant, and that's the difference between the Black group in Oxfordshire and the Black group nationally, as well as the Black group in Oxfordshire compared to other groups in Oxfordshire. So it's hard to say whether that's an actual meaningful difference. I think broadly the picture is that the Oxfordshire differences generally reflect the national differences. So we can also look at the data from the Graduate Outcomes Survey to see how occupations of those students who are in employment 15 months after graduating vary by broad ethnic group. And we can see some interesting differences, and when we consider the types of subjects which the different groups are more likely to do, they start to make a bit of sense. So one thing which stands out is that there is quite a high proportion of Black graduates working in health professions, and we know that things like subjects allied to medicine are quite common amongst Black students studying at university. And in general, Asian and Black groups are more likely to be working in health professions compared to mixed and white groups. The mixed group has a higher proportion than the Asian and Black groups in teaching and educational professions. There's a similar but slightly lower proportion amongst the white group. And then, unlike the other groups, the Asian group includes sales occupations in the top 5 occupations, which are chosen by graduates post the completion of their studies. So moving on to look at salary data, we're able to look at salaries split into 3 broad categories. So we have a lower salary bracket of anything up to £20,000 per year. We've got a higher salary bracket of £40,000 per year and above. And then we've got a middle bracket which covers everything in between. And looking at the differences between the different broad ethnic groups in Oxfordshire is quite difficult, again, because this is survey data and those numbers are quite low. So what we've also looked at is the picture nationally to see whether the Oxfordshire picture matches up with the national picture. One interesting difference that we can see is that Asian graduates are more likely to be earning in that highest salary bracket of £40,000 per year or more. And this also does seem to be the case in Oxfordshire compared to the other broad ethnic groups. However, again, it's not a statistically significant difference, but it is one which matches up with the national picture. In Oxfordshire, it also seems as if black graduates are more likely to be earning in that lowest salary bracket of up to £20,000 per year. However, again, not statistically significant. And when you look at the national picture, it's not necessarily black graduates, which are most commonly in this lower salary bracket, but mixed graduates and white graduates have a higher proportion nationally, 22 and 23% respectively, compared to 18% for black graduates nationally. Okay, so we've covered the types of occupations and salaries of graduates from Oxfordshire. In this next section, we're going to look at the labour market more broadly. So starting with the broad trend over the last 20 years, which has been of increasing employment rates across most ethnic groups, but especially certain non-white ethnic groups, such as the Pakistani and Bangladeshi groups. And what this has meant has been the reduction in the employment rate gap between the white group and certain other ethnic minority groups, especially, for example, the Pakistani and Bangladeshi group, which had an employment rate of around 40% in 2000. And in 2020, that figure was closer to 60%. And I should note again, this is the national picture. Unfortunately, we don't have the data specific to Oxfordshire. What we do have specific to Oxfordshire, however, is data on the types of industries which are commonly worked in by different ethnic groups. This is data from the last census in 2011. And if we were to take two groups of industries, so for example, an industry which typically offers high salaries, such as professional, scientific, and technical industries, and look at the proportion of different ethnicities that work within that industry, what we can see is that Chinese and mixed white and Asian groups are more likely to be working in these types of industries than other ethnic groups within Oxfordshire, including the white British group. And that matches up with other information we have in the report on these ethnic groups, on things like typical socioeconomic background that we saw in the higher education statistics data. And if we're then to take another grouping of industries which typically offer lower salaries, so process and elementary occupations, we can see a different picture. We can see that Pakistani, traveller, Bangladeshi groups are much more likely to be working in these industries compared to other ethnic minority groups, including white British. Again, a point to note is that the numbers for the traveller community are quite low, even from the last census, but it still matches up with other information that we know about that particular group. Another interesting thing to pull out from this data is that the Pakistani group seems to be more likely to be working within these process and elementary occupations within Oxfordshire than is the case nationally. So 38% for Oxfordshire versus 29% nationally. Bearing in mind this is data from 2011, but it is quite an interesting gap. So speaking of pay gaps, we have national data on how average pay for different ethnic groups compares to white British. So you might just be able to make out the different lines on this slide. So you've got blue lines representing the pay for ethnic minority groups, and you've got a pink dotted line representing the pay for the white British group. And if the blue lines are higher than that pink dotted line, it suggests that those ethnic groups generally earn lower salaries than the white British group. If those blue lines are below the pink dotted line, it suggests that those ethnic groups earn higher salaries. Just going to pause for a sec to see if this PowerPoint is going to let me stay in presentation mode. Otherwise, I might have to reshare. Let's see. Okay. So if we take a few examples of where those lines are quite divergent, we can see that Pakistani and Bangladeshi groups seem to be earning significantly lower salaries on average compared to the white British group nationally. And then at the other end of the scale, it seems as if the Chinese group and the white Irish group are earning significantly higher salaries than the white British group. Okay, so this is the final section of the presentation, which looks at business and enterprise. So the experiences really of business owners and how that varies by ethnicity. Now, one of the issues we have is that we don't really have good data for Oxfordshire on this. We have data nationally from some sources, and we have data for Oxfordshire on the nationality of business owners from Companies House, but we don't have data on ethnicity. So I'm just going to wait for that slide to stay there. Okay, so in terms of the national data, which looks at the experiences of business owners, there was a report published by the British Business Bank in 2020, and this looked at how business owners self-reported various aspects of business success and how that varied by ethnicity. The report found that Black entrepreneurs reported lower turnover and profit than white entrepreneurs, and many fewer met their business aspirations. Important to note as well that this report also looked at other demographic factors such as gender and where within the UK these business owners were based. And it found that Black female business owners and female business owners from Asian and other ethnic minority backgrounds seem to experience the lowest levels of business success. But also that aside from ethnicity and gender, socioeconomic background and where business owners were based within the UK were also very important in determining entrepreneurial success. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, because that was the last part of this presentation, is just summarize what we covered, and then I'm briefly going to show an interactive dashboard that we've created, which allows you to explore the data from the previous census on how ethnicity varies across small areas in Oxfordshire. And then we can move on to a Q&A. So to summarize, from the last census, 16% of people were reported as from an ethnic minority background. And we're expecting, once we see the results from last year's census, that this proportion will have increased, because we know that from the pupil census data, which is released annually, state school pupils from an ethnic minority background have increased in proportion, especially amongst the other white category. In terms of deprivation, all ethnic groups are more likely to be resident in more deprived parts of Oxfordshire, and this is especially the case for Black ethnic groups. And maybe then unsurprisingly, most ethnic minority groups had a higher rate of free school meals, but also lower GCSE attainment when compared to white British. However, in 2020, Indian and Chinese groups achieved the highest percentage of English and maths grades, and this is the case both nationally and in Oxfordshire. And the family background of undergraduate students from Oxfordshire differs by ethnicity. Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and Black backgrounds less likely to have parents with higher education qualifications or employed in managerial or professional occupations. So in terms of subject choice for both apprenticeships and higher education, there seems to be variation there by ethnic group. And this is also reflected in choice of occupation. One example of this is health professions being more common amongst the Black ethnic group. The Asian and Black groups were both more likely actually to be working in health professions in Oxfordshire and nationally, and we're talking about graduates here. The ethnic groups most likely to be employed in those higher salaried professional, scientific and technical industries were the Chinese and mixed white and Asian groups. And this is based on data from the 2011 census. And then when we look at the lower salaried occupations in process plant and machine operatives and elementary occupations, the ethnic groups which are more commonly working in these industries were the Pakistani, traveler and Bangladeshi groups. And then there's this point around how the Pakistani group seems to be more likely to be employed in these low salaried occupations in Oxfordshire than is the case nationally. And then finally, there's the point that we've made about national data showing that both ethnicity and gender, as well as economic background and where individuals are based within the UK, have a determining effect on whether business owners report levels of business success. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint deck now, and then I'm going to share a Tableau dashboard. So if you bear with me 1 second, I'll just swap that screen. Okay, so you should now be seeing a different view, which is an interactive dashboard. If anyone's not seeing this, please mention so in the chat. So this is a dashboard which will be available online, so anyone can access it and explore. We do have another dashboard which shows how ethnicity has changed between the 2001 and 2011 census, which I'd also recommend taking a look at. But in this dashboard, what you can do is see how ethnicity in the Oxfordshire population varies by small area across Oxfordshire. We also have similar views for how country of birth varies. And there's also a third view in this dashboard, which looks at the associations between ethnicity and different types of deprivation, which I can very quickly show in a sec. But firstly, just to look at what this map is showing, what we're looking at is the proportion of these small areas populations which are ethnic minorities, so all ethnic groups excluding white British. And what you can see is there's a hotspot here in Oxford City. There's another hotspot here in Banbury, and that reflects the slide which Margaret showed. But there's also some other interesting areas where there seems to be a higher proportion of ethnic minority residents than you might expect, for example, in this area near Kidlington. And this is where an understanding of the local geography is really important. So if we scroll in this area, we can see that this small area covers the Oxford Airport. And we know that at the time of the last census, there was a immigration detention centre within this area. So that might explain why there is that higher proportion of ethnic minority residents in that particular small area. So another thing we can do with this dashboard is we can explore not ethnic minority groups in aggregate, but take specific groups and see how they vary across Oxfordshire. So if we just take, for example, the other white group, we can see that within Oxford City, there is a hotspot. It's not the same hotspot that we saw when looking at all ethnic minority groups, which covered more of the city, especially in the south. Here, the concentration seems to be more in the north of the city, especially in areas around Summertown and the centre, where we know there's university accommodation, which might explain or might say a bit more about the white other population living in those areas. Another interesting area which pops up is this area north of Bicester, which is a small settlement called Caversfield. Now, if you search online for Caversfield, you can see that there's accommodation there for US Air Force staff who work at a nearby RAF base. So potentially that could be a reason for that particular area having a higher proportion of other white residents. And one way you can check that is then by looking at the country of birth data. So if we were to go to the country of birth view in the dashboard, and if we just select Cherwell, and currently this is showing the proportion of the population born in any other country aside from the UK. But if we want to look at just the proportion born in the United States, we can see that there's a very high concentration in that small area of Caversfield. So it's likely that that concentration of the other white ethnicity in that area corresponds with those US Air Force staff. So the only other thing to show on this dashboard is this final view, which looks at associations between the proportion of these small areas which have an ethnic minority population and different domains of deprivation. So each of these blue dots corresponds to one of those small areas on the maps that we were just looking. There's about 400 of them. And here what we're looking at is all ethnic minorities. So the population of these small areas, which is ethnic minority, compared against the overall index multiple deprivation rank, where 1 is most deprived and higher numbers are less deprived. And what we're looking for is how closely these dots conform to a diagonal line, which would suggest there's quite a strong association. We can also look at other aspects of deprivation as well, for example, crime, and we could even look at specific ethnicities to see how that affects that association. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this dashboard and then start sharing the slides again. And I think we can then move on to the Q&A.
Thanks, Alec. Why don't you just change that over? Can we just ask a quick question about where people would find that dashboard, please?
So I can send around a link following this webinar.
Thank you. So we can share that with the attendees. Yeah, thank you, Alec.
Thanks, Mel. I don't know, I'm not able to see the chat, Mel, so do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions at the moment. I don't know if anybody would like to type anything in or let us know if you'd like to ask anything of Alec or Margaret. Usually takes people a few minutes to type them in anyway, doesn't it, afterwards? So one question's just come in. I'm saying really interesting, thank you. Are there plans to update the dashboard with the Census 2021 data?
Absolutely. I think there's if we're just waiting to hear from Department of Education next steps from the last local skills plan and report. So I think once we know what the funding situation is like, we'd like to fund that refresh so we can have the more up-to-date version. But this is definitely a fantastic foundation, fantastic start, but it would be really helpful to have that refresh if we funding allowing, but we'd like to do that.
Thank you. Another question. Thanks for the interesting presentation. Were there any particular results that you found surprising or unexpected?
I can say one thing, or Margaret, do you want to continue?
I think the thing that we started to see, for me, the thing that we started to see in various bits of the data was really the difference in what looked to be differences in the population, in the Pakistani population in Oxfordshire compared to nationally. That it looked possible that we have that particular ethnic group is in lower paid occupations and possibly poorer than the population as a whole nationally. So that was surprising, I think, for me. I don't know, Alick, if you had anything.
Yes, that was actually the first thing that came to mind, but I think also maybe it's not really surprising when you think about it, but what became clear in writing the report was that in trying to analyze ethnic groups in aggregate, it's quite tricky, especially for the other white group, which is the largest ethnic minority group in Oxfordshire. It represents such a diverse range of different subgroups, I suppose. And there was that difference between the other white group in Oxford City and how that compares to the other white group in Banbury. There's differences there in likelihood to be living in deprived areas, for example. So it's really hard to pull out recommendations based on these broad ethnic groupings.
Thank you. Thanks both. Another question's just come in. Is there a difference in the levels of English as a first language between the different ethnicities? And if there is this reflected in the educational attainment or other topics?
That's a very good question. It's something I think we might have to take away and get back to you, but it's a very good question. And it is something that we should be able to look at, I think, from the people census data and the attainment data. But yeah, I'm not completely sure how we marry up those two things. So that's yeah. And Alick, have you got thoughts? Do you know of?
No, I think we can look at it from the pupil census data because that records first language and ethnicity, so it would be possible to do.
Great, thank you both. No more questions have come in at the moment, but I think, oh no, sorry, one more. A couple of people have just asked, is it possible to have a copy of the slides to share? Would that be okay for us to circulate those to the attendees afterwards?
Yes. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I think we're just coming to the end of time. I think there is a survey when you come to leave, everyone. And one of the questions does ask if there's anything else that you would like to know more about, having seen the presentation today. So if you do have any further questions or thoughts once we leave, please do put them in the survey or get in touch with us at skills@oxfordshirelep.com and we can share those with Margaret and Alick and Sally. So thank you, everybody. That's all the questions, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining, and thanks again to Alick and Margaret for leading on the presentation. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks everyone. A few comments coming in saying thank you and well done on a great presentation. So thank you very much, everybody.